Religion can be an incredibly profitable business if done right. And there's no better example of this than the Vatican, the world's smallest sovereign nation. At just 0.27 square kilometers, it is home to the wealthiest religion on the planet, the Catholic Church. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an update on global trends that shape our future. The Catholic Church has been plagued by scandals for decades, but it remains the second largest religion globally, with over 1.3 billion members. This entire empire of vast, unimaginable wealth is sustained by your donations. However, the Catholic Church is clever. If people knew just how wealthy they are, no one would continue donating to them. That's why they keep their true finances very private, making sure the public never sees the Church's actual financial state. This is why, in 2021, the Catholic Church claims to be low on reserves, running a deficit, and in desperate need of your donations. Yet, in Australia alone, they're worth at least $30 billion, more than what Starbucks is worth around the world. Some simple math can give us a rough estimate of the Catholic Church's true wealth. In Australia, the Church has around $30 billion in assets and 5.5 million Catholic members. That means they extract an average of $5,454 per person. With 372 million Catholics in Europe, the US, Canada and Australia combined, and $5,454 per Catholic, the Catholic Church has a little over $2 trillion in wealth. That puts them in the same league as companies like Apple, Microsoft and Amazon. If they were to get a conservative 3% return on that $2 trillion, the stock market typically returns 10%, that would give them $60 billion every year, tax-free. But what does the Church tell the public? That in 2018, they only profited a measly $20 million. Nowhere near even $1 billion. At the center of this financial empire is the Vatican Bank, also known as God's bankers. Today, it's better to think of the Vatican as a combination of the Federal Reserve, an offshore bank, and a hedge fund, rather than just the headquarters of Catholicism. The Vatican is the ultimate corporation that has stood the test of time like no other, and this is how they've done it. Even though the Vatican has billions today, it wasn't always this way. At times, the Church was close to going bankrupt, deep in debt, like many people who rely on high-interest credit cards, where they can only afford the monthly interest payments. But what if there was a way to get a loan at a much lower interest rate, use that to pay off the high-interest debts, and be left with one fixed monthly payment with a clear payoff date? That's where Upstart comes in. Upstart is a fast and simple way to get an online personal loan to pay off high-interest debts. Whether it's credit card debt, consolidated loans, or personal expenses, Upstart can give you a loan with one fixed monthly payment and a clear payoff date based on your income and employment, not just your credit score. Centuries ago, the Vatican was a secular empire, with the popes acting as kings and leaders of the Roman Church in Italy. The popes believed God had chosen them to reign over other world leaders. During the time of the Pope Kings, the Vatican controlled over 15,000 square miles of land in Italy, called the Papal States, much larger than the tiny Vatican City today. This land was important because maintaining the lavish papal court was expensive, so the popes taxed the people they ruled over, just like corrupt governments do today. Over time, the taxes weren't enough for the extravagant lifestyles of the popes and their cardinals. But the popes had a brilliant plan. They started selling indulgences, or tickets that promised to reduce the punishment people would receive for their sins. This became a massive cash cow for the Church, as people were terrified of God's wrath and were willing to pay to avoid it. Hundreds of church officials abused this system, but with millions flowing into the church treasury, the popes didn't complain. After all, the prosperity was God's will. This continued for over 1,000 years, making the Church and the popes wealthier and wealthier. But then, starting with the French Revolution in 1789, things began to decline. Napoleon demanded tribute, and other European leaders started taxing the Vatican's money. The popes called this the work of the devil, but they couldn't stop the endless streams of money from drying up. Something had to be done. As taxes on the papal states kept increasing, the people rebelled, eventually storming the Vatican City in 1848 and murdering the papal prime minister. The Vatican went deep into debt, 2 years behind on bills, with taxes almost non-existent. Desperate, the Pope turned to the Rothschild family, a Jewish business, for help, despite having to swallow his pride. The Rothschilds lent the Vatican 50 million francs, around $10 million, to cover their budget for a year. But in 1870, the Italians invaded Rome, ending the Vatican's control of the Papal States. The massive Papal Empire had fallen, reduced to the tiny Vatican City we know today. Around 60 Italian families stayed loyal to the Pope. They were known as the Black Nobles. The Vatican was at a crossroads, and this led to the first ever Catholic investments into secular businesses. The Pope started investing money into Roman real estate, and luckily he caught the front end of the real estate boom. For a while, his investments were a big success, and most of the Black nobles just followed the Church's example and invested in the same properties as the Pope did, and they got rich too. But then, in 1887, the property market crashed, and the Vatican was back to square one, looking for a new way to make money. So the Church started asking for donations, or Peter's pence as they called it. They were in the important business of saving souls, and if regular Catholic Church members wanted to get in on the salvation, all they had to do was donate some money to the Church. And the Church was back in business, starting to invest more than ever into secular businesses. Then, just like most of the major global corporations, the world wars came along, and the Church saw an opportunity to profit like never before. But they were never a true banker. They are just as World War I broke out. A new pope took control of the Vatican. Donations plummeted, and so did the Vatican's income. For a while, the new pope tried to get Italy to stay neutral in the war, hoping that it would keep their investments in Italy safe. But in 1915, the Italians declared war on Germany and joined the Allies, leaving the Pope desperately looking for a way to keep his revenues up. So the Vatican rented one of its properties in Rome to an arms manufacturer that sold to Germany. Yes, the Vatican was indirectly making money selling weapons of war to the other side of the war. When the public eventually found out about the arms dealing, the Church said it was in complete shock and never knew about what its tenant was doing. But it was all in vain because by 1933, the Vatican was losing around 100 million lira a year. Desperate not to go under, the Pope finally gave in and got a real financial advisor who helped keep the Vatican out of the gutters by making a lot of diverse investments. And the most profitable time in Vatican history was only just starting when World War II hit. Instead of staying out of politics and focusing on religion like he did in World War I, the Pope went all in and took the German side. The Vatican had become friendly with the fascist leader of Italy, Mussolini, and Germany seemed to be a similar choice. And in exchange for their support, the Third Reich would deduct 8 to 10% of Catholic Germans' wages to be sent directly to the Vatican. The Third Reich was taxing Catholics on the Vatican's behalf. The Church usually had trouble getting people to pay on their own free will, so automatically taking 10% of all Catholics in Germany's monthly wage did a lot to boost the Vatican economy. The Germans and the Vatican got so friendly that when the sitting Pope died, there were rumors that Hitler could pay 3 million gold Reichmarks, or $12.6 million at the time, and pick whoever he wanted to be the next Pope. The new Pope, although not officially picked by Hitler, seemed happy to keep a good relationship with Germany and even held a grand reception for Hitler's 50th birthday. Money was once again flowing into the Vatican City. But there was a new problem. All the Vatican's transactions and money was kept in Western banks and Europe, which meant that most of it could be traced or even frozen, and it wouldn't be long before the Allies found out just how much of the Church's money was coming from Germany, which would mean instant blacklisting. So the Pope's financial advisor came up with a new plan: build a bank in the Vatican. After all, the Vatican is its own country, so why shouldn't it have a national bank? So this bank, with this long name, the Istituto per le Opere di Religione, EOR, was born. It only had one branch inside the Vatican City, and it wasn't on anyone's blacklist, which meant it was free from wartime regulations. The new Vatican Bank could operate anywhere in the world without showing profits, annual reports, balance sheets, or where its money came from. And it only had one shareholder: the Pope. Now, the Vatican could take money from whoever they wanted, deposit it into their own bank, and never leave a single paper trail behind. And it didn't take people long to see how the Vatican Bank could be useful to them. From all over Europe, rich Italians were now depositing their money into the Vatican Bank by sending an employee over the street with a suitcase full of cash. But it wasn't only the Italians. Eventually the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA, found out that even Hitler was making regular deposits into the Vatican Bank, using a Swiss bank as a middleman. Out of all the clever business moves we've seen, this has got to be one of my favourites. Near the end of World War II, the Vatican was so deep in bed with the Germans that they would even take money from the life insurance policies of Jews that were sent to camps. When the families came asking for the money they rightfully deserved, the insurance companies would ask to see a death certificate they knew no one could actually get. So they kept the money and, you guessed it, deposited that money into the Vatican Bank. And it wasn't just the Germans. In the days of the Italian mafia, anyone with drug money, racketeering money, or any other illegal funds could deposit their cash at the Vatican Bank, and no, it can never be traced, and their deposits never made public. The Vatican Bank became known as the place to launder or hide your money. And with all that notorious reputation came a lot of government attention. But instead of closing down the bank for its forward to legal or unethical activities, the Italian government thought they could profit too, and decided that all the regional banks owned by the Vatican would have to start paying tax. By the mid-50s, the church had 600 million members and was dependent on donations for most of its money and investments. So when a report came out that the Vatican had $13 billion in liquid investments, the Pope quickly corrected them, saying that it was probably closer to $500 million, less than 4% of the estimate. But soon, the church would run into more trouble with donations, and it wouldn't be because of people finding out just how much money they had. Around the late 20th century, reports started going around about how priests abused children. Obviously, the idea that the priesthood, the people who were supposed to be the leaders of the churches, were hurting kids was bad news for donations. The Vatican had to do everything in its power to keep people quiet. If the church admitted to knowing about the abuse, it would be the end of them. So by January 2002, the Catholic Church had already paid out around $175 million in settlements to families from Australia to Europe. Instead of apologising, the Pope made excuses, which meant even more lawsuits were filed and even more money was paid out. By 2014, that $175 million in settlements had turned into more than $3 billion. Donations dropped, but as usual, the Vatican had a plan. In 2013, after the death of the sitting Pope, they decided to make a radical change. They would elect a new modern Pope, one who would appeal to the masses, promise reform, and actually make it seem like he's making change. So Pope Francis took power and set out to fix the church's reputation. And it worked. With the help of a pope who could appeal to the masses and make it seem like he really cared about the people, the Vatican was able to make everyone conveniently forget about what they had done to get so much money and power in the first place. Which leads us to today, where the church has more than 1.2 billion followers. Based on my estimations at the beginning of this video, they have around $2 trillion in wealth. And their number one call for donations is yet again that they're on the verge of bankruptcy, even though one Catholic official in New York City alone is the largest landowner in Manhattan, proving once again that when you have just the right combination of guilt, fear, and the promise of eternal life, religion can be one of the most lucrative businesses in the world. This is how the Vatican really operates, and why this is probably the first time you're hearing about most of this. Other empires like the Vatican are exactly the same. They're never going to publicly review their motives and intentions. But that's exactly what we're doing here. Going over all the things they'll never be able to teach you in business school. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like as well as a sub, so more people can see this.